feel like you had a different experience than Vinny Chase and the boys. Vinny Chase gets famous around the age of 19, 20, maybe 22 years old in the narrative of the show. You got famous at around 6, maybe 7?
Somewhere around there, yeah.
So do you
when I was 19 and...
Oh, no, go ahead, Haley.
And then when I was 19 and 20, that was when I was starting college in New York and sort of stepping away from Hollywood for a while. So we've had inverse entrances into the business, I guess.
Do you think coming back after college has given you a completely different perspective on the industry than you would have had if you had stayed in it at 19, 20 years old?
I think so, and as they cover in the show, that's also kind of a treacherous age, and that's when there's a lot of temptations and things that are sort of outside the acting work that can be distracting from your craft. And so that was really the reason, one of the reasons I went to college was to really focus on that. I studied theater at NYU, and coming back now at this age has just sort of helped put things in perspective and really has given me a good sense of what my priorities are here. So when you have an experience like Entourage, which is that kind of crazy Hollywood world, it's you take it with a grain of salt and you just sort of enjoy the ride.
Now, what I think is so interesting about what you studied at NYU, I think last time you were here, you talked to me about how you studied more experimental theater, correct?
Yes, yeah.
I mean, that's kind of exactly that's kind of what I imagine, exactly what I imagine someone who's smart as a child actor would do when they're a teenager, because you get to go to college and do that thing that you're probably never going to be able to do for money afterwards. You get to have this incredible experience that probably does inform all of the more maybe mainstream roles that you're taking in the future.
Well, the great thing about acting is that you can always learn more with it. And my experience in college and studying experimental theater was that it was just, we were putting on things that were very dissimilar from what I would normally be doing, making films and on television and everything. And just having that extra skill set really helps. Even a character like this where, studying the physicality and coming at a character from that perspective, it just sort of broadens your ability to create characters like that.
What was the physicality of this character that you came up with and studied a little bit?
Well, the first time you see me and Billy Bob, we're walking our horses up to meet Ari, who's getting out of his SUV. And there's just something about this character when you put on his cowboy boots, he's got the big belt buckle and everything. There's this natural Texan swagger that he has. But added to that is that, his father actually worked for his money. And my character's kind of a pretender who wants to go to Hollywood and really stand out and everything. So there's sort of this puffed up quality to him that was really fun to play with. Yeah, and he dresses sort of ridiculously too, as you can see in that little clip.
He does dress ridiculously, kind of like the high-end Ed Hardy type clothes, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
I don't know if we're allowed to outwardly rip on Ed Hardy these days. But your character's kind of going for it. We have a question coming in from Ryan Buxton, one of our editors, who asks about your early years. Are there any moments from your first few years in Hollywood that you look back on now with a new understanding? Anything that was really screwed up or shocking that didn't really make sense as a kid?
I've had a very wholesome experience making movies and being on television when I was younger. Working for people like Spielberg, who have always, cared a lot about having a family-friendly environment on set and really caring about the well-being of the young people working for them. But what really has seemed different in retrospect is just the content of the movies. And again, with Spielberg, like working on AI, there was the Stanley Kubrick exhibit at LACMA a couple of years ago that I went to, and
amazing
to find they had a whole room about AI, and just coming back to those movies with an adult perspective as an audience member is really crazy because to have been a part of those projects at all is just amazing, and I feel very lucky.
I would imagine the hardest part about being a grown-up child star is having to answer consistently the cliched question assumption that being a child star was somehow in some way screwed up rather than just an experience that you had as a kid that may have been fine.
It's not hard to answer that, but I do think there is a skewed perspective of it because, and it's understandable. You mostly hear about the bad stories about kids who worked in the industry. You don't hear so much about people who had positive experiences. That doesn't make the news as much. And there's great laws protecting kids in California working these days. All the sets I worked on had great directors. It was a great environment for me to work on, and I was able to go to school, in a regular school through all the phases of my education. So. I just feel really lucky to have had a positive experience with something that can sometimes be associated with negative ones.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I feel like every time I interview someone who had a career as a child, people are immediately, well, you got to ask him if it was really fucked up when he was a kid. You got to ask him. And it's like, how do you know
Right.
that? There's no stories that would lead you to that assumption. Yeah, you all think that he has some crazy, weird stories of from when he was a child, which is just rarely the case.
Yeah, it is. It's and when I wasn't on set all those years ago, I was doing 3 hours of school in the trailer, so it was a pretty normal, natural experience for me.